Ladies and gentlemen, this is a little paper bird that I made. I made this using a single piece of uncut paper, simply by folding it in a specific way to create the shape I wanted. Now the cool thing about this is it looks perfectly like a little animal, doesn't it? Fact is, it can even flap. It's cool, isn't it? Something this small, created using a single piece of paper, just folded in a specific pattern. This creation, this paper bird of sorts, was my introduction into origami. I found this when I was 9 or 10 years old, and I obsessed over it. I couldn't get over it. It was the best thing in the world for me because it was intriguing. Why is it folding something in a specific way gave a specific result? It was beyond what I understood at the time. One piece of paper and I could create art like this. But I was even more surprised when I discovered that this art that I thought was purely a form of entertainment actually was so much more. That it had a genuine and real purpose in the world of engineering, one that I never saw coming. So to understand those purposes, to understand those applications, let us first take a look into what origami is. Now origami is very simply transforming a flat sheet of either paper or some other material into another shape. An example would be a scorpion or a much better looking bird than mine. Now this art dates back to at least 400 years in Japan, where there were a few hundred of models. Today, there are more than tens of thousands of documented patterns, most of them documented at the end of the 20th century and at the start of the 21st century, showing that it is clearly still very active now. Now, there are many fields upon which we could have chosen to advance in. A new technology. Of all things, why origami? Why something that, as far as public perception was concerned, was all fun and games, was all artsy-fartsy, something you would have fun with? Again, a number of very good reasons. Firstly, because of the fact that it is created using one sheet and one material, it saves material costs and production time. This is because rather than making separate components separately of the same product, everything is made from one source material. What that means is that the steps taken in production is reduced. Now, along with being able to do that, origami also offers a very good advantage of allowing something large through folding to become much more compact. Now, what that does is, obviously, for one, reduce storage and transportation costs. Now, a funny thing is that there are actually researches being done that show that folding something may actually increase the resilience of the structure. An example would be the Kevlar shield. Now, this shield is something you can fold very quickly, put in the back of your car. But then, when needed, you could just put it up to defend yourself, as many police officers do. This thing is proven to be able to stop bullets from a handgun, even at the parts where it is creased. Even more so, there are even other models of this Kevlar shield that can stop bullets from an assault rifle. This, of all things, shows that origami very much has a place in real-life applications. But even then, many of engineering, or I would say as far as most engineering applications, don't use materials that are malleable. Don't use paper-based materials as far as paper technology has come in recent years. Materials used are often hard and not particularly malleable. In this situation, the uses of hinges and surrogate folds as well as ball bearings can become a sort of an alternative to having creases on a piece of paper. What I mean by this is, if you can see on the images, The iron plate uses hinges and ball bearings to essentially become something much smaller. You can just slot it into place. And on the circle shown, this is what is known as surrogate folds. Essentially cut from the same piece of material are specific parts to form a specific shape, almost like a jaggedy net. Now what this does is, by removing material, it makes it much more flexible, almost to mimic the crease you would get if you're folding a piece of paper. Essentially what this means is that it allows for thick, rigid materials to, in essence, be folded. But it's not as easy as folding paper. For one, to be able to properly understand how you are going to fold something like this, you need to know, number one, knowledge in regards to the geometry of what exactly it is you are trying to fold, and number two, the properties of the material that you are using. Some may be more malleable than others, for example. Now, as cool as all this is, let's take a look into some of the applications of this particular form of origami-based engineering. Now here's the thing. Origami-based engineering is and sounds very unorthodox. It's not something I would expect a regular person to know. Which is why the first thing I did was check NASA's website, and lo and behold, I found out that they've been using it for a lot longer than most people will realize. Now, let's talk about the first application, and that is the solar panel array deployment project. Essentially, what this does is that large solar panel arrays, which can go from 27 to 30 meters in diameter, can be folded using a folding technique known as the Mura fold. Right? Using this folding technique, it is folded to roughly 2.7 to 3 meters diameter only. What this means is that this very large thing becomes much more compact for launching and then reliable in its deployment, because it does not involve any mechanical parts. You are essentially going to be unfolding what was folded earlier. No fancy processes that could possibly become damaged in the travel from here to space. That was the concept. In 1995, the Space Flyer mission used this very same solar array and became the first of many similar other missions that would do the very same thing. Another application is what is called Project Starshade. Now, a typical Starshade mission would involve two spacecrafts. One, a telescope spacecraft whose sole purpose is to observe planets that are far from us, but close to the star of their solar planet. And the second spacecraft will fly roughly 40,000 to 50,000 kilometers in front of the telescope in the direction of said planet and star. And it would unfold a starshade almost the same way a flower would unfold. Even with the petals, even the design was made similar to a flower. What this would do is block out the light from the star so that the telescope can observe the planet much more clearly. Now here's a question. Why use something that can fold and unfold almost like a flower? Why not just have something, a much more rigid material, use a folding mechanism but use something solid, rather than what's being used here, which is a type of polymer? That's for one very simple reason. There is a risk of many micrometeorite strikes hitting something that large in space. Now, what that could mean is that it would create holes which light would enter through and could possibly disrupt the observation of the planet. Now, Project Starshade was made with this specifically in mind. The design was made this way so that even if they were punctures, it wouldn't negatively affect the observation. Now, this holds many of the same benefits as the previous application that indicates it's easy transporting, it's easy to unfold, and easy to use. This project was actually supposed to deploy at the end of 2022. At the end of 2020, excuse me. However, due to the COVID dilemma, I'm actually unsure on what's happening on the project as nothing has been released. The third and final application involving space travel, or NASA as a whole, is Project Puffer, which is short for the Pop-Up Flat Folding Explorer Robot. A very long name, but quite fitting. The way it has been made is that its circuitry is embedded into its actual body. So what that means is that the actual device is much more compact. It has also been devised to specifically fold in, particularly its wheels as shown in the image. The point of it is to stack on top of planetary rovers such as the Mars and Curiosity rover, and then access places that these larger rovers cannot, like small crevices or under small cliffs. This picture is an early prototype of the Project Buffer. Newer prototypes have 4 wheels for better mobility, and it may include some equipment that's used to collect samples for further study. Now, as interesting as all of this is, I think an application that's much more relatable to you and me, to the people here on this planet, is its use in medicine. Now, nanotechnology in medicine is by no means anything new. People have been researching this for years and years on end. I didn't realize how significant of a part origami played in it. So let's talk about 2 particular applications that I believe to be the most interesting and could potentially become the most significant in the upcoming future. Number 1 is the nano injector. Essentially what it is a very small injector which purpose is to deliver DNA to cells and to take sample from individual either infected or cancerous cells. Now, seeing as it's dealing with individual cells, it obviously has to be very, very small. Or to be specific, 4 micrometers small. Very, very small. Now, it moves by having these structures almost like legs, as you can see in the image, that fold and then unfold, allowing them to move forward with just a little bit of force applied to it. Where is origami in this, you ask? Well, the body of this device is actually cut from one material and with strategic creases placed in. What this means is that instead of having to make separate parts, all of them incredibly small, and then combining it all together, it could simply be cut from one part, making it much more efficient process. Now, another application is the Da Vinci robotic surgery. This is something that has become increasingly common in today's day and age, robotic surgery. As the photo shows, it involves one doctor conducting a surgery on patients through robotic controls. The problem with that is robots, while yes, they don't get tired, are not as accurate and precise as humans are when we are controlling our own limbs. So there is always a risk of some amount of movement in terms of equipment, for example, that could potentially damage its victims. One example would be the catheter, which is a medical device that, amongst other things, is used to extract urine from the bladder. Now, in the Da Vinci robot, as the image shows, the way it works is that there is a device that can stretch and open up. So it stretches up when the flexible catheter is inside, and then it basically compresses to press it into a person's body. Now, the problem is that when it presses in, there is a risk of the catheter moving, which could potentially harm the victim. So an origami design was made, a design as the image shows that when stretched, the hole in the center always remains aligned and centered. What that means is that when the catheter enters the patient and is either stretched or compressed, there is always a supporting structure for the flexible catheter. Another example is prongs. Now, there always has to be some equipment to allow doctors to grab something from within a person's body, particularly in robots. Now, the image above shows one piece of technology that is currently in use, something rather large, and in comparison, something much, much smaller. The smaller thing is a design known as chomper. Essentially, it is a very flat piece of material that is 3D printed, funnily enough, that can be inserted through a small incision into a patient and can then be deployed into almost like prongs to allow us to grab things inside. Very small. The benefit this obviously provides is that it allows for much smaller incisions to be made, which could for one speed up the surgery and also speed up the recovery process. But there is still an issue. How do we control these things even though they are based on origami? We cannot force them to unfold by inserting another piece of equipment because that could cause more harm than good. So the development of what is known as smart materials began. Amongst other purposes, the way it works is that it reacts in a specific way to specific stimuli. For example, something could fold inwards when a magnetic force is applied and fold outwards when an electrical force is applied. This research has been conducted for roughly 2 or 3 years to be used specifically in the medical field. This concept is what is known as self-folding. Now, here is the important question. We know all of this about some of its applications. We know that it has untold potential when used in the right fields. So what does the future hold? Let me tell you one of the major drawbacks of origami-based engineering. The expertise required to perform it is incredibly high. You need to be good at geometry, you need to understand materials, you need a long amount of time to plan how exactly you want to apply something. As an example, Robert Lang, the man who essentially spearheaded the use of origami engineering in NASA, created this cactus as shown. Now, it took him 7 years to plan and make it. 7 years. Now, that's no short amount of time. The problem with origami-based engineering is just that. It takes so much time. Many of the technologies that I have shown in my presentation are still very much in research and development stages. So what I can say with almost certainty is they're not going to be coming about soon. But within the next 10, 20 years, we could potentially see a very large increase in origami-based materials in much more advanced fields such as medicine, perhaps even construction and architecture. Origami is even being taught to young children as a way to boost cognitive thinking. So it's no longer a mysterious thing. It is growing. It is growing at such a steady state. And that is what I truly believe to be the beauty of engineering, just as a whole. That as much as we innovate, as much as we create something new, it all starts off with us analyzing a situation, finding a problem, and taking steps to fix it. Origami-based engineering is one of these steps. It is clearly a field in engineering that is very worth being considered, very worth being advanced and invested in. That's it. That is all from me. Thank you very much.